The internet has changed the way we live. It has changed the way we work, the way we shop, and even the way we date. It has also changed the way we kill.
I'm Donald McIntyre, and I'm on a quest to explore the dark side of our online world, where one click can lead to murder.
The internet and social media has been a godsend to online predators. Why? Because of the speed in which they can, one, create fake profiles, but two, access victims.
I'll be investigating some of the most disturbing crimes in recent history, where the internet and social media have been used to trick, torture, and kill innocent victims, lured into a virtual world where nothing is as it seems.
Clearly, she did not realise the person she was talking to online was the man who was going to kill her.
In this programme, a social media serial killer. Stephen Port found his victims on gay dating websites and poisoned them. He was one of the most prolific British killers of recent times, murdering at least 4 men, maybe more.
Why did Stephen Port feel this compulsion to kill? How did he get away with his terrible crimes for so long? And what role did social media play in helping him to murder again and again? Whether you're looking for love or just for sex, internet dating sites and phone apps have completely transformed the way people get together. And that's especially so for the gay community, where phone apps like Grindr, Gaydar and FitLads enable people to instantly find willing sex partners.
But for serial killer Stephen Port, these online dating apps were just a hunting ground for potential victims. In the summer of 2014, he lured 23-year-old student Anthony Walgate to his home for casual sex.
Cheers.
It's here where he poisoned him, raped him as he lay dying, and then callously dumped his body outside his flat. Anthony's death was the first in a murder spree that lasted over a year and took the lives of 3 more young men in their early 20s. The tragedy is, those men might still be alive today if the obvious links between their deaths had been investigated by the police.
I'm on my way to Barking in East London, where Stephen Port lived and where 4 of his victims died. And I want to find out why 4 young men would put themselves into such danger and whether the internet fueled their murderous depravity.
In 2006, Port moved to this Barking estate to be nearer the bus depot where he worked as a chef.
Stephen Port lived at this bottom flat here, and seemingly a gloomy recluse. His neighbours described him as cold, antisocial, vain, and a bit odd-looking. But what turned this gloomy recluse into a prolific serial killer?
I'm meeting local journalist Sebastian Murphy-Bates, who covered Port's case.
When I spoke to the people who lived actually in his block, they all said that he was the kind of guy who, if you bumped into him in the corridor, he wouldn't say hello. It just came across that he was quite a selfish, vain, gloomy, antisocial man who nobody particularly got on with at all, really.
Port struggled to make friends in his local area and also at work.
He was a very shy boy. Port describes himself as skinny who got picked on. He didn't come out as gay until his 20s, and that was something that was very difficult for him.
His parents weren't over the moon about it. His mum was disappointed. She was looking forward to grandchildren.
That would have been a big factor for him, because he would have had to have hidden who he was as a person. So the fact that he wouldn't have known that about himself, probably led to him becoming more shy and kind of pulling away from his peers.
Port found it much easier to communicate online with strangers and was extremely active on a range of gay dating sites, including FitLads and Grindr.
If you are low in confidence and if you don't want to sort of take a massive risk walking up to somebody in a bar and saying, hey, I really fancy you, it does create that space whereby you can go, do you know what, I'm not very confident, I'll just drop you a message.
Online, Port created a new and improved image of himself.
Stephen Port was an individual who was different online from how he was in the real world. That's not unremarkable. Millions of us have different sides to ourselves online, on Twitter, on Facebook, on dating apps, from how we appear in the real world.
I've been online and found two distinctive pictures of Port. One a police mugshot, and here the other from one of his dating profiles. Spot the difference. The blonde wig, presumably to make himself look younger.
For Port, the blonde wig was a symbol of power, it was a symbol of potency. He was able to take the blonde wig that he used these online selfies, and that was his link with the positive, confident Port that he was able to draw into the real world.
Police reports say that he had 20 social media accounts and multiple online personalities. In one, he claimed to be a naval officer, another that he was a special needs teacher, and another further one that he was educated at Oxford University. All lies.
And in June 2014, Port used one of his online dating profiles to connect with Anthony Walgate, a 23-year-old student and part-time male escort. Port offered £800, a lot of money for a poorly paid chef, to Anthony to persuade him to come and spend the night with him at his Barking flat.
Anthony Walgate was a fashion student from Hull. He was quite a talented guy who really wanted a future in fashion and wanted to be a designer. But we also know that he worked part-time as an escort when he needed a bit of money. So he believed he was going around there being paid to have sex with Stephen Port.
At that stage, all Anthony would have known about his date was what Port had chosen to place on his online profile. Once Anthony was in Port's flat, there would be no escape.
He was in control. He was, the god of that situation.
Port offered Anthony a drink, but spiked it with a dose of a party drug known as GHB, a drug he knew well.
We only have white, I'm afraid. No, don't worry, come on. Yeah? Anything's fine with me. Anything's fine. Yeah?
Port himself used GHB and other recreational drugs quite a lot, so he knew how to administer and he knew safe doses.
They're taken recreationally to induce a high, a sort of a feeling of euphoria, that will last normally around maybe a couple of hours. They're being used to enhance sexual pleasure. It's very dose specific. You don't need very much of it to get the desired recreational effect. Most people get that from about a milliliter of the drug.
Port gave Anthony a lethal overdose of the drug.
Yes. Oh, right.
And then raped him as he lay dying.
He seemed to want to dominate. He seemed to want to take control, and he seemed to want to have somebody who lay passively.
Just after 4 a.m, Port realised he had a problem. Getting rid of his victim's body.
When he disposed of Anthony, it's almost like he threw him out like a piece of rubbish. He'd finished with him. He was not needed anymore. He was discarded out onto the street. So, yes, on the one hand, it was panic getting rid of the body, but he didn't go to any lengths to hide the body, to take him further away. He literally just dumped him out on the street.
No one knows why, but Stephen Port then made an anonymous call to London's emergency services, reporting a body outside his flat.
Cook Street, there's a young boy who got his caps outside. I don't know.
Outside of which number?
4758. Crap store, anesthesia or something. Just always just drunk. But, yeah.
Do you know if he was breathing?
No, I don't know.
Did you see anything happen at all?
No.
40-year-old serial killer Stephen Port hunted online for victims between June 2014 and September 2015. Propelled by dark sexual fantasies, he created fake profiles on gay dating apps to lure 4 young men back to his Barking home, where he then killed them. Port drugged, raped and murdered his first victim, Anthony Walgate, in the summer of 2014.
He then brazenly dumped his body just outside his flat here. The body was reported to the emergency services by an anonymous caller.
The caller was Stephen Port.
That behaviour from a killer is a huge risk because he's inviting police attention to the site where the victim was murdered. Forensic links are there on the body of Anthony that would tie him to being in Port's company.
So why was Port so reckless?
One hypothesis I have about his strange behaviour is that the police would not expect a murderer to leave a body on his own doorstep. So what does Port do? He literally leaves a body on his own doorstep.
Within days, the police traced the anonymous 999 call to Port's phone.
Port is then questioned by the police, as is natural, and he tells them that he just, he just found him there, as he already said. The police then find out that Anthony was working as an escort and that Port had hired him and had spent the night with him.
When Port was questioned by the police, he claimed that Anthony had overdosed on his own drugs in his flat. He claimed he'd only moved the body because he was scared. The police took Port's story at face value, and instead of charging him with murder, they charged him with perverting the course of justice because of his earlier lies.
Port was then bailed to appear in court later that year and freed to kill again.
The fact that Port got away with this increased his sense of power. He knew that the police believed his story, and it also would have made him feel that I can do this because the police don't care. Serial killers don't pick people who are going to generate a huge amount of attention. We see prostitutes, people who are homeless. Gay men are often victims of this type of crime. Once they are killed, the authorities don't pay as much attention than if it was somebody else.
But what motivated Port to murder Anthony Walgate in the first place?
We know from police reports he was an avid watcher of extreme gay porn, and in particular had an insatiable appetite for boyish young men known as twinks on the gay scene. And we understand that he spent a great deal of time watching videos of these so-called twinks being raped by older men as they lay incapacitated through drugs, which is exactly what he did to Anthony Walgate.
But Anthony never woke up.
I think with Port, he had quite a dark sexual appetite in relation to he liked almost a lifeless partner.
The darker reaches of the internet made it possible for Port to explore his macabre sexual fantasies.
They can quite easily put their want and desire into Google and get results. Not only will they see and read about their fantasy, they will see hundreds of thousands of sites. What does that do? Well, it justifies their fantasy.
He went very deep into this hit of this fetish and just became completely obsessed with it to the point where he had to actually act it out and had to be the person doing it. It wasn't just enough to sort of watch it, he had to do it again and again.
To act out his fantasies, Port used the illegal drug GHB to render his victim unconscious. But how easy was it for Port to buy the drug?
Well, GHB, Port's drug of choice, the drug he used to seduce, subdue and kill his young victims, is widely available online. I did a quick trawl of the internet and found multiple sites, including this one, where you can order it online. It gives you information about the art of seduction and various blogs on the use of GHB and sex.
GHB may be a major part of the gay scene, but for many people in the wider community, it's a drug they wouldn't encounter.
GHB is a relatively new drug to those of us working in the profession, although we've seen it for about 10 years now. Most drug and alcohol services and most people working on the periphery of drug probably won't know that much about it. So it is possible that, the police just didn't know about this.
Port clearly found acquiring GHB a straightforward proposition. And for him, it proved to be a deadly weapon.
Port used GHB to kill Anthony Walgate. Now he was going to use it to poison his second murder victim, 22-year-old Slovakian Gabriel Kavari.
In August 2014, 2 months after the killing of Anthony Walgate, Gabriel Kavari, a budding artist, made the fatal mistake of agreeing to be Port's flatmate. Days after Gabriel moved in, Port drugged him with a lethal dose of GHB.
Cheers. 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 You okay?
As the 22-year-old lay unconscious, Port fulfilled his dark sexual fantasy of raping a lifeless body. At some point in the sickening attack, Gabriel was killed by the overdose of GHB in his system. Having killed Gabriel, Port's next task was disposing of the body. He dumped his first victim right outside his front door.
This time Port went to a little more effort, though not much. He simply carried Gabriel's body from his flat about 250 metres over here to the graveyard at St. Margaret's Church just over here. This simply was a serial killer operating in plain sight.
I can't believe that Port wasn't seen carrying a body through Barking. Barking, while it's not a sort of buzzing young metropolis full of people going out all the time, I've never seen it quiet. The fact that he dragged it down a road, quite a busy road, and then over a roundabout and then to the green is just unthinkable. He was so lucky to get away with it.
Port may have managed to remain hidden as he dragged a body through Barking unseen, but he didn't go to any effort to hide the corpse. And on August 28, 2014, a dog walker discovered Gabriel's body in the cemetery of St. Margaret's Church, which is less than a quarter of a mile from Port's flat.
The police reacted to finding Gabriel Kavari as just, it's a kid who's overdosed on drugs. It wasn't seen as particularly suspicious.
Back at his flat, Port had already set about covering his murderous tracks. On Facebook, he created another fake profile. This time, he pretended to be a man called John Luck. As John Luck, he told Gabriel's grieving ex-boyfriend that Gabriel had been collected from the flat in a green car by a mysterious man. Port didn't want people to think that he was the last person to see Gabriel alive.
With Port, lying comes easily to him, and he's so used to pretending something that he's not. It's very indicative of his personality structure, that he's got these narcissistic traits. He's got this kind of fantasist lifestyle where he makes up things.
People like him very often have difficulty communicating face-to-face because they're not intuitive people, so that they have to learn and then manipulate. And that's so much easier to do online.
Port seemed to be an expert in creating fake social media accounts. But just how difficult is it to set up a credible Facebook profile?
Well, I've just created this Facebook account in a matter of minutes, and I've created the name, well, John Smith, as you'd expect, pretty anonymous. I've presented myself as a 20-year-old man, and I'm based in London, and it asks for a few more details about me, and so I'm presenting myself pretty much as Stephen Port would have done.
Creating a fake profile is very easy. It takes minutes, we know that. But it still takes that time. It takes time to research. It takes time to understand. You've got to be that person. You can't just have a profile. So it's quick to set up, but it takes a lot of work to keep going and become credible.
Port used his online aliases to throw the police off the scent, so they wouldn't investigate his victims' deaths too closely.
What I find really surprising is the police never linked the cases of Anthony Walgate and Gabriel Cavari. 2 gay men, 2 drug overdoses, 2 bodies dumped within a couple of hundred yards of each other. And they say hindsight is a wonderful thing, but truly there are serious questions to be asked about the police actions in this extraordinary case.
What clearly went wrong here, absolutely clearly, that no linkage was made between the deaths of these young men. Men who are gay and in a certain scene, they're expected more to die of drug deaths, and it doesn't raise enough concerns, perhaps, when we're looking at those cases.
Stephen Port had now murdered 2 men and had got away with it. But were the deaths intentional, or were they simply the byproduct of his depraved sexual fantasies? Was his key motivation the desire to rape unconscious men? And were the deaths simply an unfortunate side effect he never anticipated?
I'm meeting with criminologist Dr. Liz Yardley and forensic clinical psychologist Mike Berry to try and gain more of an insight into what might have been going through Stephen Port's mind when he killed.
Were these deaths intentional?
He definitely didn't seem to care whether he caused people harm or not, did he? So he's got a complete disregard for the lives of his victims. So you could argue that, yes, he did intend to kill them. I think what he's essentially trying to do is have control over his victims and gain sexual pleasure from engaging with sexual acts with them when they're subdued.
He was an habitual drug user, sharing drugs with people, strangers he wanted to have sex with. Was it murder or manslaughter?
No, I'm of the opinion that he intended to kill them, because that's the ultimate in control. He's already controlled his victims by making them unconscious. It means he can have whatever sexual practice he wants to do. He gets no feedback from them about them not liking it or him not being very good in bed. He's in total control. And then to carry on and do the murder, he's controlling that person completely.
40-year-old serial killer Stephen Port hunted for young male victims between June 2014 and September 2015. Obsessed with extreme gay porn that depicted young men being drugged and raped, Port was driven to act out his fantasies and kill.
And in June 2014, that's exactly what he did to Anthony Walgate, a fashion student and part-time male escort. he gave Anthony a drug overdose from which he never recovered. And then just a few weeks later, he drugged, raped and murdered his second victim, his flatmate, Gabriel Cavari.
And just a month after Gabriel's death, Port again used a gay dating app to find his next victim, 21-year-old chef Daniel Whitworth.
Daniel went round to Port's flat, and again, very much a similar situation as with Gabriel.
Soon after Daniel arrived, Port used his familiar MO and gave his unwitting victim a lethal amount of the gay party drug, GHB. Moments later, Daniel fell unconscious. And for the third time, as his victim's life slipped away, Port raped him. Incredibly, Daniel's body was discovered by the same dog walker who'd found Gabriel's body just 3 weeks earlier. The two bodies had been dumped in pretty much the same spot, but this time, the police found what seemed to be a suicide note.
The note left with Dan's body over here read, "I've taken what Jeeves I've left with some sleeping pills, so if it kills me, it's what I deserve." Now, Jeeves referred to GHB, the party drug that Port had used previously to murder. Intriguingly, the note goes on to read, "By the way, please don't blame the guy I was with last night. We only had sex, then I left. He knows nothing of what I've done." Now, previously, Port had just dumped two bodies. Now, he was a little more sophisticated, though not much.
He said, "Don't blame the guy I was with last night." Port is inviting the police to look at him and see that he's innocent. This is his most audacious gambit so far.
Despite the glaring similarities between the deaths, three gay men overdosing in the same area, in the same manner, over a period of just 3 months, the police still took the note left at Dan's body at face value. Surely the police should have been more inquisitive. Had they simply traced the man mentioned in the note, then their inquiries would have led them straight to Port's door.
It should have been so obvious. My old editor rang up the police and said, "Are you linking these deaths?" And they told us, no, we're not linking them. We had a headline that said it's unusual but not suspicious, which is basically what they told us.
In January 2015, 4 months after Port killed Gabriel, he arranged to meet another vulnerable young man, 22-year-old Connor Huntley.
I first made contact with Stephen Port through my ex's Facebook. I decided to travel up to London because my ex had cheated on me at the time. So I thought, what a way to get back at him. We were sitting in the house drinking. I'm used to a strong drink anyway, like. But I don't know what it was. It felt stronger than it should have been. I just felt really wobbly, as if I couldn't stand on my own feet properly. And then things got a little bit sexual. And then we ended up going to the bedroom, we had sex and I passed out on him.
But unlike Port's other victims, Connor woke up the next morning. And when he did, Port showed him a recording from the night before. It was Port having sex with Connor's unconscious body.
I'm not one to keep quiet. Like, I would tell all my friends everything. They all basically said he raped you. Obviously, I didn't see it as rape, so I never told the police or nothing.
Was Connor being drugged and raped, but not murdered? A clue that Port hadn't really meant to kill his first 3 victims.
What makes me so special? Why wasn't I killed along with the others?
Connor's lucky escape meant that Port hadn't murdered anyone for 4 months. And that pause was about to be extended further due to circumstances beyond Port's control.
In March 2015, Port's killing spree came to a temporary halt when he was sentenced to 4 months in jail for perverting the course of justice. He'd lied to the police about moving the remains of his first victim, whom he claimed had overdosed on his own drugs in his flat here. The court and the police believed his version of events, and in the end, he only ended up serving 3 months in jail.
And when Port was released in June 2015, he soon claimed his 4th victim. Again, he used the gay dating app Grindr to connect with someone in the local area interested in a sexual hookup.
On the evening of the 13th of September 2015, Port arranged to meet a 25-year-old forklift driver, Jack Taylor, here at Barking Tube Station, just around the corner from where he lived. Jack was on time, and they hurried back to Port's flat.
Jack Taylor had been out for a few drinks. He then logged into Grindr and got chatting to Stephen Port, who'd obviously, put his sort of false image out there of who he was. Jack then goes to meet him.
At the flat, Port played out his tried and tested technique to satisfy his sexual perversions.
More big swigs.
At some point during the attack, Jack died from the drugs overdose Port had secretly given him.
When Port was finished with Jack, he employed his well-rehearsed MO and dragged the body over here to the same graveyard where he dumped 2 of his previous victims.
After he dumped Jack's body, Port planted a syringe in his pocket. He wanted to give police the impression that Jack had died from a self-inflicted overdose.
He then went home and closed his Grindr account, hoping to erase all digital connections to the victim.
Jack's body was discovered the next day. And yet again, it looked like Port's efforts to throw the police off the scent were going to work.
The death of Jack was not linked to the deaths of 3 other men. The police, after their investigations, felt that there was nothing untoward happening.
In just over a year, Port had murdered 4 men and dumped their bodies near his flat. Why didn't the police see that they had a serial killer on their doorstep? I'm hoping criminologist Dr. Liz Yardley and psychologist Mike Berry can explain how Port continued to evade justice.
He was incredibly lucky. And people don't realise that sometimes killers are lucky and some are unlucky. But he improved his technique, he got better all the time.
And the police culture themselves have been notoriously resistant to having gay officers. Only recently is this a new and accepted phenomenon. And so I think many of the police themselves wouldn't have been terribly educated, maybe, subconsciously prejudiced.
No, I disagree entirely with you.
Oh, well, they can be institutionally racist, but they can't be
they
institutionally
have changed.
homophobic.
I worked with the police.
I'm saying they've changed, but you're talking about it as an incremental change. What's clear in this case is that they didn't recognise that not every gay person who has sex and drugs is an overdose. The officers did not simply connect the fact that there was a possibility that these young men could have been murdered.
They should have joined up the dots.
And that's the key for me. It's the group of victims who he's targeting. These are young gay men, and they are a group of victims who we attach less value to as a society than if it was a group of young university students who were women.
Does this mean the police actually attach less importance and time to investigating them?
I think it can turn into that. Yes, we've got this idea of the ideal victim being the person who, when they become the victims of crime, we're much quicker to sympathise with them, empathise with them, and say, well, they're not to blame whatsoever for what's happened to them, they're completely innocent. And then we have other groups of people where we victim blame. We say, well, it's kind of their fault because they kind of had it coming. I think when you have a kind of dark, underground feel to anything, you're always going to get predators like Paul that lurk in the shadows.
Between June 2014 and September 2015, 40-year-old chef Stephen Port was driven by dark sexual fantasies to kill. He hunted for victims online using gay dating apps. Port lured 4 young men to his home in Barking, East London. where they died after he secretly gave them a lethal dose of a party drug called GHB.
He then dumped the bodies very nearby, and yet the police never launched a murder investigation into any of the cases. They believed that the victims had either accidentally overdosed on their own drugs or had committed suicide.
Crucially, though, the family of Port's fourth victim, Jack Taylor, refused to accept the police's version of events.
Jack Taylor's family were told, he's died of a drug overdose because he was found with GHB and meth in his system. They just didn't take it.
He doesn't take drugs. His family know that's not right. They know that's not what he does. Because they know their son so well, they then open this investigation themselves.
Jack's family was determined to find out the truth about what happened in his final hours.
What goes wrong for Port? He selects the wrong victim. He selects a victim that he doesn't anticipate how much his family are going to get involved. He doesn't understand that level of attachment.
Taking matters into their own hand, Jack's family trawled the internet and the local newspaper archives and uncovered striking similarities between Jack's death and 3 others near Cook Street in Barking over the previous 12 months. They felt that the possibility that 4 young gay men would overdose using the same drug in the same area over such a short period of time was highly unlikely and was really questionable.
Not just the location, but the way the bodies were positioned. The fact that they'd all died through overdoses of GHB, there was something clearly untoward that the Taylor family recognised that they believed the police had overlooked.
Convinced that all 4 deaths were the result of foul play, the Taylor family brought their concerns to the police here in Barking. They told the police that on the night he died, Jack was due to meet somebody here at Barking Tube Station.
And like every station in the UK, it's covered by CCTV. Police analysed footage from that night and found clear images of the man Jack had arranged to meet walking towards the station.
He walks all the way through the town centre, which is well lit and really heavily covered with CCTV.
The cameras then pick up the man and Jack after they meet and head off together.
You can actually see moments or hours before Jack died, him meeting this man for the first time and walking along with him on what was ostensibly some sort of date.
After pressure from the Taylor family, the police released the CCTV footage to the local media and appealed for information. A police officer soon recognised Port from an incident at Barking Station several months earlier. He'd talked to Port because he was stood beside a highly intoxicated man. The officer had let Port and the man go. 2 days after the CCTV was released, Port was arrested. Initially, he tried to bluff his way out of the situation.
Did you kill Jack Taylor?
I did not know. No.
Did you administer any drugs or noxious substances to him?
I did not know.
With the intention of causing him harm?
No.
But it didn't take long before Port's web of lies started to unravel.
The police look back along this sort of bloody trail. There's just a litany of clues. Daniel Whitworth was found on top of a blanket with Stephen Port's semen on it.
As well as the DNA match, other evidence linking Port to the murders started to fall into place.
There's the handwriting on the suicide note. There's the fact that one of the bodies was outside his flat. There's just so much adding up.
Are you telling us the truth, Stephen?
I'm telling you the truth, yes. 100% truth.
About all of these boys?
Yeah.
Young boys, all found dead. Stephen?
Yeah, I understand, but...
Close to your house. One of them had been in your house.
After his arrest, the police accessed Port's computer and found 20 social media accounts. Some were in Port's own name, but most were under aliases. The police also trawled through 200 images and 10 million lines of data. What they found was highly incriminating.
We were specifically searching for videos of porn to do with people who are either asleep or have been drugged. and are being raped, you've typed in the word rape, haven't you?
Yeah, it's just searching for random videos. What's nothing specific in particular?
Nothing specific. Is that right?
Yeah.
As well as analysing Port's internet history, officers looked for connections between all 4 killings.
Police forces and forensic experts call crime linkage. They took behavioural aspects of all 4 deaths and looked for similarities in each and every one, and on numerous accounts, similarities were there on all 4 deaths.
Stephen, this is serious.
Yeah, I know.
Okay. It's really important that you tell us the absolute truth.
Port had used the internet to hunt down his victims, but now his own online history was proving his downfall.
As soon as they had him, it just all fell, which makes it even more just mind-blowing, by the way, that he pleaded not guilty to the 29 counts that he was facing. It's insane.
Port was tried here at the Old Bailey in October 2016, and despite protesting his innocence throughout, was convicted on 22 counts. These included not only the murders of Jack Taylor, Anthony Walgate, Gabriel Cavari and Daniel Whitworth, but also the drugging and sexual assault of 7 other victims whose cases came to light during the course of the police investigation.
Conor Huntley was one of Port's surviving victims who gave evidence in court.
I couldn't believe what was being said to me by the police, because although it was a bit weird, I generally didn't think he'd be able to do something like that. But I never actually found out that he'd murdered 4 people until I got to court.
Port didn't react when the jury found him guilty.
Port was sentenced to a rare whole life term, meaning he will never be eligible for parole.
As a criminologist, I know it's possible to group online killers into different categories, such as predator, imposter, or reactor. I want to find out what type of murderer Stephen Port was.
Well, I describe Stephen Port as a predator. So this is somebody who uses the internet and social media to gain access to victims, to lure them into their net, essentially.
How many more potential victims do you think Stephen Port may have had?
I wouldn't be at all surprised if he's not got other victims that haven't turned up for one reason or another. We assume that he's killing from home. There may be occasions when he's killed from a different place. And we're not looking at that option at all. We're just assuming that he's killed at home. Well, what happens if he went to somebody's house and killed?
Liz, how can dating apps be used more safely?
I think there are some general safety advice points, aren't there, that we can bring out in relation to any kind of dating app. So always be safe, tell somebody where you're going, when you're likely to be back, that kind of thing. But I think more broadly, we need to take a step back and say, what kind of society are we in that we've normalised this kind of approach to dating, to hooking up with people? And I think it's those bigger questions we need to get to if we're going to prevent this kind of thing happening in the future.
The increasing popularity of dating apps is making it all too easy for online hunters to find their prey.
Port's crimes were made possible completely by social media. That's not to say that they're to blame for it, it's just that it created a space whereby a dark and very disturbed individual like Stephen Port, with the fetishes that he had, could use it as a smokescreen and also a facilitator to meet these men.
Conor Huntley survived his encounter with the serial killer, but his thoughts are with those who did not.
There was justice, not only for what happened to me, but obviously for what the family had been through. They've got justice, but it's never going to bring their baby boys back.